Let's pick up where we left off with Neil Oliver. Neil, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me back in the decompression chamber.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels a bit like that, doesn't it? I mean, I come in here every morning and sort of let loose an awful lot of stress. But I have to say, I woke up this morning feeling quite sort of beaten about by it all. You know, this whole Keir Starmer's now suddenly moved from being a man that was questioning last week the 10 o'clock curfew, rather, asking for the medical evidence that proved that it was worthwhile, to now going sort of full lockdown. It's bizarre.
I hear myself week after week saying I can't follow it anymore.
Yeah.
I can't make sense of it. But definitely what has changed as the months have gone on is the appearance on the scene of more and more voices, credible voices, scientific voices, people who've worked in healthcare for their entire lives, eminent virologists and epidemiologists, definitely questioning the lockdown. And I find that it actually only intensifies my feelings of doubt and anxiety, because when you feel for a while that you're on your own and it must be something wrong with you for thinking that this might not be the best way to go ahead, you can tell yourself that it's you're in the wrong. But increasingly, I'm hearing more and more voices that are saying and seem to be expressing thoughts that I've had all along. And now you think, well, why are the powers that be and those who are able to make the decisions just betting more and more money on the roulette wheel in the hopes that they finally get a big win, which I don't think anybody else thinks is coming.
Well, no. And also the numbers I'm very suspicious of now. And the more and more people I speak to are saying they don't really trust the way the government is rolling out these numbers. You hear more and more percentages and fewer actual numbers. So as somebody said to me yesterday, if hospital admissions have gone up by 40% in Merseyside, if it's gone up from 10 to 14, that's no big deal. If it's gone up from 1,000 to gone up by another 400, well, that's something else. But we don't know the actual number.
No, and I read an article. I know you can only put a certain amount of weight on any given piece of writing, but in Spectator magazine this week, I think it was Dr. John Lee, who's a pathologist, and he was suggesting that, or he was saying that we will never know how many people have actually died of COVID because of the way in which the government's been counting deaths. And also he was a pathologist, part of the coronial system, the coroners, and he was pointing out that uniquely there were changes made that normally with the advent of a new disease, and he made the example when AIDS and HIV appeared in the 80s, that the autopsies and the work of coroners and pathologists better to understand what the disease actually was crucial in coming to an understanding of how best to deal with it.
Yeah.
But changes were made and autopsies haven't been carried out on COVID deaths, on people who died of COVID. And furthermore, in the past, it was necessary for two doctors to come to a sort of agreement around the death certificate about what had been the cause of death.
Right.
And now that's no longer happening. It's one individual. And sometimes that one individual is declaring the cause of death, never having actually met or encountered the person in real life, just some kind of video conversation that has taken place at some point. It all ended up with this eminent figure saying, we'll never know how many people have died. And so all around the world, we're comparing ourselves with, we've lost this many people. And in that country, they've lost that many. But there's no consistency between the countries about how the deaths have been calculated. So while we're daily told that Britain is doing so terribly badly, and maybe it is, but because different countries have always been counting in different ways, I don't see how there will ever be a point where we'd be able to compare death rates in different countries. And I continue to believe that from what I've read over and over again, it tends to be something like 600 in every million die of COVID in the population. And I think in years to come, when it's possible to look back on it with some kind of hindsight, every country will have lost at the same level because we don't have a cure, we don't have a vaccine.
Right.
This whole thing about locking down, if they do, I'm sure, if they locked us down round the world for 24 hours a day, then the numbers of infections would plummet for certain.
Yeah.
But you have to keep letting people out after 3 months or after a certain period of time. and then people mix, and the numbers go up again because they don't have a vaccine and they don't have a cure. And at the moment, this week, the last couple of weeks, the talk of a vaccine has gone further and further back into the long grass again.
Right. Well, I mean, more or less, Boris Johnson this week more or less said there may never be a vaccine. I mean, those are his words. You know, there's no vaccine, he said, for several diseases. There may never be one for this. And also the whole lockdown thing, Neil. Yes, the infection rate goes down, but it only goes down until you stop the lockdown. So it only goes down for the 2 weeks, you know.
Yeah, and at the moment, what they're showing, what their own figures are showing, is that the infection rates, however they calculate them, percentages, figures, or whatever, it's happening around schools and universities.
Yeah, now, very clearly.
That's where the numbers are going up. It isn't, and yet they're crucifying the hospitality industry again.
Right.
But it stands to reason. If obviously people are cropping up, are being counted as having been in pubs, in restaurants, and so on, because we're all filling in the forms that say I was here, and here are my contact details. But that's only identifying people who are out and about. Going to a restaurant is just one of the things they're doing.
Yeah.
They're out in the community. Maybe they're students at university, or maybe they're parents who've got children coming and going from school and whatever. And there doesn't seem any logical connection for me between saying, well, the numbers are going up, let's shut down hospitality again. Where is this? I don't see the sense in that. And they're not talking about shutting down the schools again at the moment. They're insistent on the students being at university,
yes.
Locked, in solitary confinement in their halls of residence. The picture is not holding together.
It's really not. And also, we've just seen the announcement from Northern Ireland, Neil, in which they have decided to lock down schools for an extra week. And I have to say, I'm not entirely confident that if I lived in Northern Ireland as a parent, I wouldn't be entirely confident that it's only going to be 2 weeks. So they're taking half term and then they're adding another week. Now, if you're a parent, as we both are, and you have to take time off with your kids because it's half term, you now in Northern Ireland have to take 2 weeks.
In simple terms, if they don't have a vaccine, and there's a certain amount of open admission at the moment that could be a long time in the future if it comes at all.
Yeah.
Then the only bullet they have in their gun is lockdown.
Yeah.
You can't. Well, are they seriously contemplating for now into an uncertain future? They just keep locking either parts of or the entire population down for weeks and weeks on end, just so that they can salve their consciences that for that limited period they kept their various numbers. Yeah. At levels that they happen to be, feel less guilty about, and then every time they have to let people out again after a lockdown, the numbers go up again. Until they have a vaccine, they can't solve it with lockdowns.
Yeah,
it's simple.
No, they really can't.
I said to you last week. I feel increasingly the virus is running the show here.
Yeah.
Until they have a vaccine or a cure, they can't actually meaningfully affect what the virus is doing beyond the lockdown. And that's only a temporary measure. That just delays deaths. That just stops deaths happening now and delays them until some point in the future. And it increasingly feels like the virus is driving the car and the governments are in the passenger seat with one of those wee toy wheels that you give your kids where they can pump the horn and move the steering wheel.
Yeah.
But the car's going where the parent is driving it to, and they're just pretending. They're just pretending with their wee plastic steering wheel and their wee pump horn that they're having some kind of effect on the destination of the population, and they're not.
No.
And they won't admit it.
But this is the problem, isn't it? Because if you go back 7 months, I mean, I remember the first lockdown like it was yesterday, actually, because I was sitting in a bar about 100 yards away from the opening door of this office, and there was nobody. It was already nobody in the bar because I think for the first 2 or 3 days before that, they'd been warned that this was happening. And I remember speaking to the woman who was behind the bar, who was a drama student. She was from Eastern Europe, and she said, well, I've just had my drama school closed down. I'm hoping that this won't last for very long, this lockdown, because I won't be able to make any money. And I'll probably have to go home to my country because I can't get a job here, because I can only really work in hospitality. And I don't know where, I haven't seen her since.
And at the beginning, I understood it. We all understood it because this thing came in. We saw the footage in China, and then we all saw the footage in Italy, and it was quite understandably that it looked very, very frightening. and there was all the talk about, was this a man-made virus? Was this all sorts of frightening rumours were out there circulating. But then, as at 9 months or whatever it is, however many months later, it seems to be undeniable that there's this 99% recovery rate from the disease.
Yeah.
And that while the numbers factored into a global population of whatever we're at now, 8 billion, it is a large number, but when you set it against the context of 8 billion people, it's not. It's,
right.
It's a small percentage of people who have been harvested by this so far. And yet they have 9 months or months later, they're persisting with these draconian measures that have decimated economies, possibly to the point of no return. And there's all the collateral damage to people with heart disease, cancers, all the other ailments that aren't being treated. And it is simply no longer looking like careering down this road that we're on is going to take us to anywhere but disaster.
Well, exactly. And I said at the start of this show, what is the point of saving lives over here if over on the other side of the wall there's a load of people dying because they're committing suicide, because they're destitute, because they've lost their home, they've lost their job, they have no prospect whatsoever of doing anything about helping to see their elderly relatives, at all before they eventually pass on. It's just, I just can't believe that people think that this lockdown measure is even going to work, because it clearly doesn't work. All of the lockdown areas, we spoke about this last week, that have been in mini lockdowns have had the rates of virus infection increase. So, I mean, it doesn't even, there's not even a guarantee that it will work, is what I'm saying.
We're not hearing from people who are having a bad COVID. We're hearing from the politicians, we're hearing from governments, we have been hearing in the main from those scientists that believe that what the governments are doing is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
We're not hearing from the people really who are being destroyed economically or emotionally or in terms of their health or by a combination of all three.
Yeah.
And the people who have their hands on the levers of power, they are busy, they're on full pay, they're feeling able that they're out there in the world and they're having an effect. They feel as if they're doing something constructive and they're filling their day constructively with the busyness of trying to come to terms with all of this. The journalists who are covering it on a daily basis, all of those are the people who, in the context of the pandemic, are in the best place because they've got their livelihoods are secure, they're out feeling busy, they're mixing with their colleagues at some level, but we're not hearing from the people who are being destroyed by this.
No. And
you begin to wonder, when will we ever hear about all the various lonely destructions and lonely deaths that are already happening and that will surely ensue if this goes on for, and we're talking about this being measured in months.
Yeah.
Before too long, we're going to look back and realise that we've been doing a variation of lockdown for years. And what kind of toll will that take? And we're not hearing from the people that are on the sharp end of that.
Well, of
Although
course.
in our communities we are, I'm hearing things. I'm starting to hear rumours about people taking their own lives.
Yeah.
I'm starting to hear about people who've been destroyed by it in terms of their businesses and all the rest of it. But continuing to be told by the politicians and others that we're all in it together. When they awarded themselves a $3,500 a year pay rise or whatever, we are evidently not all in it together.
No. Well, I'm like you, beginning to hear stories of people saying that redundancy letters are being passed around their offices, regardless of whether it's a big business, a small business. The furlough scheme runs out at the end of this month, as we know. There's going to be a big effect on that, I think, and people are going to find themselves out of work, and there are no jobs. So, if the timing of the lockdown is such that it happens towards the end of this month, it'll be just in time for people who are all out of work to literally have nowhere to go and to sit there contemplating their futures and be pretty depressed about it, I would imagine.
And imagine Christmas. People go into this time of year, the long nights, the darkness, weather in our part of the world. This is part of what it is to be in Northern Europe at this time of the year. And when people go towards Christmas, people go towards New Year. These are traditionally periods of time anyway where large numbers of people struggle. This is a difficult period that we're going into. And yes, as you say, we're now looking at there being millions of people out there who are staring some kind of economic devastation in the face, loss of jobs. They're going to have children around them saying, what can I have for Christmas?
Yeah.
And all the rest of it. Families that will not be able to contemplate all of those things that are traditional to this part of the year. And then we go into the new year and the doldrums of goodness, the first week in January and what that's like. What is that truly going to be like for people when all they've got to look forward to is the thought that a vaccine is still sometime in the future, and at the moment the only thing the governments can think of to do is shut people in their homes and shut the businesses?
Exactly.
That's
right.
disastrous.
Yeah, and part of the problem as well, Neil, as we've said before, is the kind of uncertainty. Because if somebody says to you, look, we're going to lock down, everything's in a lockdown actually until December the 31st. If you said that, and if you then said, and then after that, we are going to launch ourselves at a new economy, a new way of working, we're going to invest massively in all sorts of businesses, everybody's going to work, everybody's going to have a job, even if it was kind of pie in the sky, people would want that. They would say, well, at least we've got something to look forward to. But now, there's nothing to look forward to.
And plenty of people, you said at the beginning of our chat this morning that, you're hearing from, or you can't find someone who's loudly in support or in support at all of what's being proposed. So you're hearing from the same broad cross-section of society that I am. And if even the people who stand to be most at risk are saying this is pointless and that this can't go on, the elderly and people with underlying health conditions are already saying that this solution that's being attempted at the moment isn't working and can't work, then the powers that be, the authorities, have to review the situation radically. Because we all understand the problem that if there are too many illnesses all at the one time, that the NHS, would be put under potentially unbearable pressure.
Well, that's what they keep saying. But as you said last week, what's it for?
True. But what's it for? Generations of our civilization have invested in the NHS, so that it's there for a rainy day. Well, it's raining. It's now raining, and the rain's getting heavier and heavier, and it's not showing any signs of going off anytime soon. And the NHS and its whether it prevails or not is just one variable. You've also got a population of 70 million people who have lives that they have to get on with, and living in constant fear of COVID is not the excuse. It should not give the government the excuse to destroy and to imperil so many people's lives, economically or in terms of other health conditions, just because they should not have these. They went at the beginning, they allowed themselves to believe that they could handle this situation, that they were going to find a scientific and an economic solution to it. Now, so far it's been demonstrated that their lockdowns haven't worked. They don't have a vaccine, anywhere in the foreseeable future. And the consequences of lockdown have been and are going to be catastrophic. Yeah, well, I'm getting, even as we're speaking, I'm getting tweets from people saying, I've just been made redundant. I don't know what I'm going to do. Another one from a guy who says his son's just been sent home from school because of a suspected COVID test, which may or may not be positive. He's going to have to isolate for 2 weeks. It's as if we've sort of suddenly given over power to these people who were elected to represent us. But I'm sorry, they're not representing us. They're not. And it does seem it's been like a very alarming wake-up call. I hadn't really realised in my naivety that a government that just happened to be in power, that was sort of holding the parcel when the music stopped, as it were, and they would pass the parcel, could then award itself all the powers that it wants to have whatever control it wants to have over every movement that everyone makes, every moment of the day. In my naivety, I hadn't modelled that, if you like, and thought that was even possible. That every time we put a tick in the ballot box, we were surrendering our every liberty and our every freedom to whoever was actually in authority in Holyrood or in Downing Street when something like this happened. And the fact that we find ourselves that none of our liberties seem to matter a tupenny damn. when it comes right down to it. If a government can just take it upon itself to do whatever it wants with our lives into an uncertain future, well, that's been a real wake-up call for me.
Yeah.
Plainly, they do have that in their power to write that legislation and get it through Parliament by whatever means. And here we are now, where we just have to wake up every morning to be told, basically, whether we can get out of our houses or not.
I know. And then what you can do when you do get out of the house, which won't be very much, I'm afraid.
No, and then they're in this cleft stick where they're feeling the need to let students be at university, to let pupils be at school, to let some people be out there working, which means that before you even start, your lockdown's a myth. A lockdown's only a lockdown if every single person, including them, everyone from Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon down, is in their house for 24 hours a day and everything else is shut. That's a lockdown.
Right.
Anything less than that has as many holes in it as a colander.
Yes.
And people out there somewhere are mixing and they're taking it back into their homes. And maybe not as fast as it would be if we were all out together, but the mixing of humanity is happening because there has not been a single lockdown that has actually locked everyone down for a period of time at the same time. The people were out there filling the supermarket shelves, the bins were being collected, the nurses and doctors were out in the hospitals, and all the variations in between. These are not lockdowns.
Yeah, and as you say, Neil, the next one won't be either, and that won't work either. It's not rocket science. Neil, thanks very much indeed. Got to go. Unfortunately, we're out of time already, but welcome once again to the show.